Chapter 1. The Arrival. The Zyran spaceport was the heart of the galaxy's trade, commerce, and cultural exchange. A colossal hub where species from every corner of the known universe converged to share ideas, technology, and resources. The Zyrans, with their multi-limbed elegance and sharp minds, prided themselves on the efficient control they maintained over this grand nexus of interstellar civilization. The air was thick with the metallic scent of ion engines, the chatter of hundreds of different languages, and the distant hum of freighters and shuttles coming and going. Most of the alien species that walked through the spaceport never paid attention to humans. They were considered a quaint, underdeveloped race curiosity of the galaxy, fragile but tenacious in their own corner of the universe. Most were traders or diplomats, not warriors. The galaxy had seen far fiercer species, and no one suspected much of humanity. Which is why, on the day Alyssa Porter stepped off the transport from Earth, no one paid her any mind. She was just another human ordinary by every galactic standard, petite, with brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, and plain clothes that made her blend into the crowd of travelers. Her eyes, however, held something deeper, something that even she struggled to control. Alyssa adjusted the strap of her duffel bag, her eyes scanning the crowded spaceport with a quiet intensity. She had been briefed. Earth's government sent her as a covert observer. The Galactic Alliance had invited humans into their ranks decades ago, but only as a diplomatic courtesy. Earth's representatives knew well enough that their military was far behind the capabilities of most other races. But they had a secret, a wild card hidden from the rest of the galaxy. A growing population of mutant humans born with extraordinary powers, the result of thousands of years of selective evolution and genetic mutations triggered by Earth's ever-changing environment. Alyssa was one of the most powerful mutants Earth had ever produced. She sighed, pushing through the crowd toward the Zyran checkpoint. Her mission was simple: blend in, observe, and gather intelligence. She was to keep her powers hidden at all costs. But something deep in her gut warned her that this mission wouldn't stay simple for long. "Identification, please," a tall Zyran officer said, his voice smooth but cold. His 6 eyes blinked in perfect synchronization as he scanned her. Alyssa handed over her identification card, suppressing a nervous shiver as the scanner beeped. "Earth delegate," the officer said with a hint of disinterest. "Purpose of visit?" "Trade negotiations," Alyssa replied smoothly. "I'm part of the human envoy." The Zyran waved her through, not even looking at her twice. Alyssa exhaled slowly, feeling the slight tension in her shoulders ease. She passed through the checkpoint and entered the city beyond. It was like nothing she had ever seen before. Tall spires of metal and glass, towering over the bustling streets below. The architecture was sleek, organic in form, as if the buildings themselves had grown from the ground. Alien species of all kinds moved around her, from towering, scaled beings to creatures that floated like jellyfish in the air. But she wasn't here for the sights. Her real mission lay deep beneath the city's surface, hidden in the shadows where only the most dangerous players in the galaxy operated. Alyssa made her way through the crowded streets, careful to keep her senses sharp. The faint hum of her telekinetic abilities buzzed at the edge of her mind. She had been trained for years to control it, to hide her powers from those who might exploit or fear them. But here, in the heart of the Zyran Empire, she felt the weight of the galaxy pressing in on her. She found a quiet alley and ducked inside, away from the prying eyes of the crowds. With a quick glance around, she tapped into her communicator. A familiar voice crackled through the small device. "Status report, Alyssa. Have you made it inside?" It was Commander Ryan, her handler back on Earth. "Just cleared the checkpoint," she whispered. "No issues so far." "Good. Keep a low profile and remember the mission. You're there to gather intel on the Zyran weapon development project. We need to know what they're planning and if they pose a threat to Earth." Alyssa hesitated, glancing around the alley again. "And if I get caught?" "You won't," Ryan replied, his voice firm. "You're more than capable of handling yourself. But if it comes to it, you know what to do." Alyssa swallowed hard, nodding even though he couldn't see her. She had been given strict orders not to reveal her powers unless absolutely necessary. Earth's mutants were still a secret to the rest of the galaxy, and the last thing the government wanted was to tip their hand too soon. "I'll check in later," she said, ending the transmission. As she stepped back into the street, Alyssa felt a strange prickle at the back of her neck. Someone was watching her. Her eyes darted across the crowd, searching for the source of the uneasy feeling. A pair of tall, armored figures caught her attention. Zyran enforcers. Their sleek black armor gleamed under the city lights as they moved through the crowd with purpose. But they weren't looking at her. Not yet. She kept walking, her heart pounding a little harder now. The Zyran Empire was known for its strict control, but there were whispers of rebellion brewing in the shadows. And where there was rebellion, there were always those who were willing to use any means necessary to gain power, including human mutants, if they knew they existed. Alyssa ducked into another side street, her senses on high alert. The city was a maze of towering structures and narrow alleys, and it would be easy to get lost in the labyrinth. But she had memorized the layout before arriving, and she knew exactly where she was going. Her destination was a small, nondescript building in the lower district, a bar frequented by smugglers, mercenaries, and other unsavory types. It was the perfect place to gather information on the Zyran secret project. As she approached, the neon sign above the door flickered in the dim light, casting strange shadows on the walls. Alyssa pushed open the door and stepped inside. The smell of stale alcohol and sweat hit her immediately, but she ignored it. The dimly lit room was filled with rough-looking aliens, all engaged in hushed conversations. She made her way to the bar, trying not to draw attention. "I'm looking for someone," she said quietly to the bartender, a burly creature with 3 eyes and a snarl that looked permanent. "Aren't we all?" he grumbled, not even looking at her. Alyssa leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "I need information on the Zyran weapons project." The bartender's eyes finally flicked toward her, narrowing. "That's dangerous talk, human." "I can pay," she replied, sliding a small credit chip across the counter. He eyed it for a moment before taking it. "You're looking for Arnon. He deals in that kind of intel. But be careful, he's not the type to trust easily. And neither is anyone else around here." Alyssa nodded, slipping away from the bar. The name Arnon was one she had heard before, a notorious information broker who had his hands in everything from illegal weapons trading to government secrets. If anyone knew about the Zyran's plans, it would be him. But as she weaved through the crowd, her instinct screamed at her that something was wrong. She could feel eyes on her again, watching her every move. And this time, they weren't Zyran enforcers. They were something else entirely. Chapter 2. Into the Shadows. Alyssa's heart quickened as the tension in the air around her grew palpable. She could sense the eyes watching her more intently now, almost as if they could feel her power hiding beneath the surface. But they didn't know the extent of it. If she stayed calm, she could maintain her cover. The atmosphere in the bar was thick with secrecy, and as she navigated the dimly lit room, her mind whirred with the myriad dangers lurking in this alien den. She approached a corner table, her senses still tingling. A hooded figure sat in the shadows, his form barely distinguishable from the murky darkness of the room. This had to be Arnon. His presence was notorious, and Alyssa had been briefed that he rarely showed his face unless a deal worth his while was on the table. He operated in the shadows, where information flowed like credits, but no one could truly say they knew him. "Are you Arnon?" Alyssa asked quietly, standing just outside the faint glow of a nearby lamp. The figure didn't move at first. A long moment passed before a gravelly voice responded. "Who's asking?" "A friend who can make it worth your while," Alyssa replied, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. A chuckle rumbled from beneath the hood. "A human, no less. You're a long way from Earth, little one. What makes you think I have any interest in your credits?" Alyssa leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I hear you know about the Zyran weapons project. I'm here to talk business. And I'm prepared to offer more than just credits." The hooded figure shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of a reptilian snout and glowing yellow eyes. Arnon's species, the Sarkai, were known for their cunning, and he had built a reputation as one of the most elusive information brokers in the galaxy. "You're either very brave or very foolish," Arnon said, his eyes narrowing as they studied her. "Do you even understand what you're asking for, human?" "I know more than you think," Alyssa replied, her mind racing as she calculated her next move. She couldn't reveal too much, not yet, but she had to make it clear that she wasn't here to play games. Arnon was silent for a moment, then he gestured toward the bar. "Drinks first, then we'll talk." Alyssa nodded, signaling to the bartender. 2 glasses of a glowing blue liquid were brought over, something she recognized as potent even among the most hardened alien species. She took a small sip, letting the burn settle in her throat, and waited for Arnon to speak. "You're here about the Zyron's secret project," he finally said, swirling his drink lazily. "But you don't realize the danger you've walked into. The Zyrons, they aren't just building weapons. They're harnessing something far more destructive. Something even they can barely control." Alyssa's mind raced. This was more than just a weapon. "What do you mean? What are they doing?" "They found a way to manipulate Vixen energy," Arnon continued, his voice low. "It's not just a weapon. It's an energy source that could wipe out entire systems if used incorrectly. And from what I've heard, they're on the brink of losing control." Vixen energy. The very name sent a chill down Alyssa's spine. She had heard whispers of it during her training on Earth. It was a volatile, unpredictable form of energy found deep within the cores of certain planets. Its power was immense, but its instability made it almost impossible to control. No one, not even the most advanced species in the galaxy, had successfully harnessed it without catastrophic consequences. "And they think they can weaponize it?" Alyssa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Arnon nodded. "They've been experimenting with it for years. But the energy is too wild, too unpredictable. They've lost control more than once. Rumor has it, they're planning to test it again soon. And if they fail this time, it could mean the end of this entire sector." Alyssa's blood ran cold. This was worse than she had imagined. The Zyrons were playing with forces they didn't understand, and if they unleashed the full power of Vixen energy, it could tear through the galaxy like a wildfire. She had to stop them, but she couldn't do it alone. "Tell me where the test is happening," Alyssa said, her voice firm. Arnon hesitated, his yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You're serious about this? Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into?" Alyssa met his gaze, her eyes hard. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Just tell me where." Another long pause, then Arnon sighed. "There's a research facility on the outskirts of the city. They've been running tests there for months, but this next one, it's big. They're planning to conduct it within the next 48 hours. If you want to stop them, you'll need to move fast." Alyssa nodded, standing up from the table. "Thanks for the information." "Wait," Arnon said, his voice stopping her in her tracks. "There's something else you should know. The Zyrons, they're not just worried about losing control of the energy. They're worried about someone using it against them." Alyssa frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's been talk of a rebellion," Arnon explained. "A group of dissidents who want to overthrow the Zyron Empire. They've been trying to get their hands on Vixen technology for years. If they succeed, it won't just be the Zyrons who are in danger. It'll be everyone." Alyssa clenched her fists. This mission was getting more complicated by the minute, but she couldn't afford to back down now. "I'll handle it," she said, turning toward the door. As she left the bar, Alyssa could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her. The Zyrons were playing with fire, and if they lost control, the entire galaxy would burn. She had to stop them, but first, she needed to find a way into the facility. As she walked through the crowded streets, her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden surge of energy. Her mutant senses flared, and she instinctively turned toward the source. A group of heavily armored Zyron enforcers were moving through the crowd, their eyes scanning the area with a sense of urgency. They were looking for someone. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. They had found her. She ducked into an alley, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to be caught now, not when she was so close to stopping the test. But the enforcers were closing in, their heavy footsteps echoing through the alley behind her. Alyssa took a deep breath, her powers humming beneath the surface. She had been trained to hide them, to suppress the incredible strength and speed that came with her mutation. But if she didn't use them now, she wouldn't make it out of the city alive. Her muscles tensed, and with a burst of speed, she darted through the alley, her body moving faster than the eye could follow. The enforcers shouted in confusion as she disappeared into the shadows, her footsteps silent as she navigated the maze of streets. For now, she was safe. But the real danger was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Rising Danger. Alyssa's heart was pounding as she sprinted through the maze of streets. She could still hear the distant shouts of the Zyron enforcers, though they seemed to be fading as she put more distance between them. The city's towering spires and crowded alleyways provided ample cover, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they found her again. She had to stay ahead of them. Slipping into a narrow passageway between two buildings, Alyssa paused to catch her breath. Her powers surged beneath her skin, begging to be unleashed. She had learned long ago to control them, but the stress of the situation was making it harder to keep them in check. She needed to focus. The Zyron research facility was her next target, and time was running out. Arnon had said they were planning a major test of the Vixen energy within the next 48 hours. That left her with very little time to act. As she pressed on through the city, Alyssa's mind raced with potential strategies. She would need to infiltrate the facility, gather intel, and sabotage the experiment. But she couldn't do it alone. Even with her powers, the security would be too tight. She needed help. She remembered Arnon's mention of a rebellion, a group of dissidents who wanted to overthrow the Zyron Empire. If they were trying to get their hands on Vixen technology, they might have the resources she needed. But trusting rebels was a dangerous game. She had to be careful about who she allied with. Still, it was a risk she had to take. Alyssa made her way to the lower district, where the city's underworld thrived in the shadows. The streets here were darker, dirtier, and filled with the kinds of beings who operated outside the law. Mercenaries, smugglers, and gang leaders, this was their domain. She knew where to find the rebels. Arnon had given her a name, Zaltor, a former Zyron military officer who had defected to the rebellion. He was rumored to be hiding in the lower district, gathering forces for an uprising. If anyone could help her get into the research facility, it would be him. Navigating the narrow streets, Alyssa finally reached a dingy bar tucked away in a forgotten corner of the district. The neon sign above the door flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the ground. This was the place. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The bar was filled with the usual crowd of rough-looking aliens, but her attention was immediately drawn to a large, imposing figure sitting at the back. He was tall, even for a Zyron, with broad shoulders and a scar running down the side of his face. His armor, though worn, still bore the insignia of the Zyron military. This had to be Zaltor. Alyssa approached cautiously, her instincts on high alert. The rebels weren't known for their trust in outsiders, especially humans, but she had no choice. She needed his help. Zaltor? She asked quietly, standing a few feet away from his table. The Zyron looked up from his drink, his yellow eyes narrowing as he sized her up. Who's asking? Alyssa Porter, she replied. I hear you're someone who might be interested in stopping the Zyrons from tearing the galaxy apart. Zaltor's eyes flickered with interest, but he didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment before speaking. You're a long way from Earth, human. Why should I trust you? I have no reason to lie, Alyssa said calmly. I'm here to stop them from using Vixen energy as a weapon. If they succeed, it won't just be your people who suffer. The whole galaxy is at risk. Zaltor's expression remained unreadable, but Alyssa could see the gears turning in his mind. He was calculating, weighing his options. You think you can stop them? He asked, his voice skeptical. I know I can, Alyssa replied, her voice firm, but I can't do it alone. I need your help to get into the research facility. Once I'm inside, I can take care of the rest. Zaltor raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Alyssa hesitated for a moment. She had been careful not to reveal too much about her powers, but if she wanted Zaltor's help, she needed to be honest. I'm not like other humans, she said slowly, her eyes locking onto his. I have abilities, powers that can give us an edge. If you help me get in, I'll make sure the Zyrons never get their hands on that energy. Zaltor leaned forward, his gaze intense. Powers? What kind of powers? Alyssa took a deep breath. Telekinesis, enhanced strength, and speed. I can move things with my mind, and I'm faster than most beings in this galaxy. But more importantly, I can control energy. I can disrupt the Vixen test if I get close enough. Zaltor stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Alyssa feared she had revealed too much. But then, to her surprise, he chuckled. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair. A human with powers. Didn't think I'd ever see the day. Alyssa relaxed slightly, but she remained cautious. Zaltor was still a wild card. So, you'll help me? She asked. Zaltor shrugged. I'll help you get in. But once you're inside, you're on your own. My men and I can't risk being caught in the middle of a Zyran meltdown. Alyssa nodded. It was more than she could have hoped for. That's all I need. Zaltor stood up, towering over her as he adjusted his armor. We leave at dawn. Be ready. Alyssa watched as he walked out of the bar, his heavy footsteps echoing in the dim light. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the mission settle on her shoulders. This was it. The next step in her mission was set. The sun barely peeked over the horizon when Alyssa arrived at the rendezvous point. The lower district was eerily quiet at this hour, the usual hustle and bustle of the city replaced by an uneasy calm. Zaltor was already waiting, accompanied by a small group of rebels. Their expressions were grim, their weapons slung across their backs as they prepared for the mission. You're late, Zaltor said gruffly, though there was no real malice in his tone. Ready when you are, Alyssa replied, adjusting her gear. Her telekinetic powers thrummed just beneath the surface, ready to spring into action if needed. Zaltor nodded. We'll take the back route. Security's tight around the facility, but there's a weak spot near the ventilation system. If we time it right, we can get you inside without setting off any alarms. Alyssa followed Zaltor and his men through the winding streets, her senses on high alert. Every sound, every flicker of movement in the shadows made her tense. But she kept her focus, knowing that one wrong move could compromise the entire mission. As they approached the research facility, the sheer scale of the building became apparent. It was a massive structure, its sleek, metallic walls gleaming in the early morning light. High-tech security drones patrolled the perimeter, their sensors scanning the area for any signs of intrusion. Zaltor led them to a narrow alleyway behind the facility, where a small grate covered the entrance to the ventilation system. He motioned for Alyssa to follow as he pried the grate open with a low creak. This is as far as we go, Zaltor said, handing her a small device. Use this to disable the internal sensors once you're inside. It'll give you a window of about 5 minutes before the alarms go off. Alyssa nodded, taking the device and slipping it into her pocket. Got it. Zaltor's expression softened slightly, and for a brief moment, Alyssa saw a flicker of concern in his eyes. Be careful in there, human. The Zyrans don't play nice with intruders. Alyssa gave him a tight smile. I'll be fine. With that, she climbed into the ventilation shaft, the cold metal walls closing in around her as she crawled through the narrow space. Her heart raced as she made her way deeper into the facility, her mind focused on the task ahead. The next few hours would decide the fate of the galaxy. Chapter 4. Unleashing the Power. The cold metal of the ventilation shaft pressed against Alyssa's body as she moved deeper into the Zyran research facility. Her breath was shallow, her heartbeat steady but quick. She knew that one wrong move, one misstep, could alert the entire facility to her presence. But as the soft hum of the facility's machinery grew louder, she steeled her resolve. This was the only way to prevent the catastrophe that the Zyrans were about to unleash on the galaxy. The ventilation system led her to a small maintenance room, dimly lit by flickering lights. She pushed the grate aside carefully and slid down, landing silently on the cold floor. The device Zaltor had given her felt heavy in her hand as she activated it. A soft beep confirmed that the internal sensors were disabled. She had 5 minutes before the system reactivated, and all hell broke loose. With quick, silent steps, Alyssa made her way toward the heart of the facility. She had memorized the blueprints of the complex during her briefing. Her destination was the Vixen energy chamber, located in the center of the building. That was where the energy reactor was housed, and where the Zyrans were preparing their final test of the volatile Vixen energy. As she moved through the narrow corridors, she kept her telekinetic senses alert. The energy of the facility pulsed around her, a low hum that resonated with her mutant abilities. She could feel the immense power of the Vixen reactor growing stronger the closer she got, and it made her uneasy. The energy was wild, unpredictable, and even from a distance, it was clear that the Zyrans were playing with something far beyond their control. 2 Zyran guards rounded a corner ahead of her. Alyssa ducked into a nearby alcove, pressing herself against the wall as she slowed her breathing. Her mind sharpened, her telekinetic abilities ready to act. She could feel the guards' movements through the vibrations in the floor. They were talking in low, hushed voices, unaware of the danger creeping closer to their precious reactor. Once they passed, Alyssa slipped back into the hallway and continued toward her destination. The control room was just ahead, a set of reinforced doors standing between her and the reactor. She approached cautiously, knowing that the security measures would be tight. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the inner sanctum of the Xiren project. The room was massive, dominated by a central energy core that pulsed with an eerie blue light. The Vixen energy swirled inside the core, barely contained by the reinforced glass that surrounded it. Dozens of Xiren scientists were busy at work, monitoring the core's activity, inputting data into their consoles. None of them noticed Alyssa as she stepped inside, her presence masked by the chaos of the ongoing experiment. She scanned the room quickly, identifying the control panel that regulated the energy output. That was her target. If she could disrupt the system before the test began, she could prevent the reactor from reaching critical levels and save the entire sector from destruction. But as she moved closer to the control panel, something unexpected happened. A sudden surge of energy burst from the reactor, sending a wave of raw, chaotic power through the room. The Xiren scientists shouted in panic as alarms blared, warning of an imminent overload. The energy was unstable, spiraling out of control. Alyssa's eyes widened as she felt the power radiating from the core. It was stronger than she had anticipated, far stronger. She could feel it pulling at her, resonating with her own mutant abilities. The reactor was drawing energy from the Vixen core at an unsustainable rate, and the entire facility was on the verge of collapse. She had no choice now. She had to act. With a deep breath, Alyssa let go of her restraints. The telekinetic power she had kept hidden for so long surged to the surface, filling her veins with a familiar, electrifying energy. Her mind reached out, connecting with the Vixen reactor, feeling the raw, chaotic force swirling within. She had never attempted anything like this before. The energy was unlike anything she had ever encountered, wild, uncontrollable, and deadly. But if she didn't stop it, the entire sector would be wiped out in the ensuing explosion. Closing her eyes, Alyssa focused her mind, channeling her telekinetic abilities toward the reactor. She could feel the energy fighting against her, pushing back with incredible force. But she was stronger than it. She had trained for this, prepared for this moment her entire life. The reactor trembled under her mental grip, the swirling energy slowing as she exerted her will over it. She could feel the pressure building, the core threatening to explode at any moment. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she pushed harder, her mind straining to contain the power. The Xiren scientists were in a frenzy, shouting orders, trying to shut down the reactor, but it was too late. The system had already passed the point of no return. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Alyssa forced the energy back into the core, stabilizing the reactor just as it was about to overload. The blue light dimmed, the alarm silenced, and the room fell into an eerie, stunned silence. Alyssa staggered back, her body trembling from the exertion. Her powers had saved the facility, but she knew it wasn't over yet. The Xiren guards burst into the room, weapons raised, their eyes wide with confusion as they took in the sight of the human woman standing in front of the reactor. They hadn't expected this. No one had. "Stand down!" one of the guards shouted, but Alyssa was already moving. With a wave of her hand, she sent a telekinetic blast through the room, knocking the guards off their feet. The scientists scrambled for cover, their faces pale with fear. They had no idea who or what they were dealing with. Alyssa moved toward the control panel, her mind racing. She had bought herself some time by stabilizing the reactor, but the Xyrens wouldn't stop their experiments. They would keep pushing until they figured out how to harness the Vixen energy. And next time, there might not be anyone to stop them. Her fingers flew across the control panel, inputting a series of commands that would permanently disable the reactor. The system protested, but she overrode the security protocols, locking the core in a stable state. She had done it, but as she turned to leave, she felt a presence behind her. One of the Xiren guards had regained his footing, his weapon trained on her. His eyes burned with anger and fear, and Alyssa knew she couldn't leave any witnesses. Before the guard could react, she unleashed a final telekinetic blast, sending him crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. He slumped to the ground, unconscious. Alyssa took a deep breath, the weight of what she had just done settling on her shoulders. The facility was in disarray, the reactor disabled, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Zyrans would come after her. They wouldn't stop until they figured out how to control the Vixen energy, and now they knew there was a human capable of standing in their way. But Alyssa wasn't afraid. She had spent her whole life hiding her powers, suppressing her true potential, but no longer. The galaxy didn't know what it was dealing with, and if the Zyrans or anyone else thought they could harness the destructive power of the Vixen energy, they would have to face her. As she walked out of the facility, disappearing into the shadows of the city, Alyssa knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had no idea what kind of danger it was in, but soon they would.